Welcome back to the Shared Services Advantage series. In the last few episodes, we've shown you how to stand up shared services all the way from mapping and staffing to intake and transitions. But today, we're shifting gears and asking, once shared services is live, how do you run it like a business? And that's really the real test, because standing up shared services is one thing, but managing it is something else entirely. Because shared services doesn't succeed at launch. It succeeds once it reaches a steady state. And that requires a completely different mindset. So you can't treat it like a one-off project or an internal utility. You've got to operate it like any other business unit, where you're focused on delivery, focused on cost, performance, and improvement. So in this episode, we're going to be breaking down how to manage shared services after go live through the lens of business ownership. So we're going to cover what steady state actually means and how to manage the shared services relationship with discipline and cadence, and how to drive improvement while keeping accountability in the right hands. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Gyner Ozgul, CEO at Fortis Fire. Gyner, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Yassin. Pleasure to be here again.
Awesome. Well, I'm grateful to catch you just before you go on your holiday. So we'll keep this short and nice and start to talk about defining or maybe redefining steady state. Because steady state doesn't mean set it and forget it. It means the process is live, but it's now being operated with intent. So you've got a staff trained team. You've got KPIs and SLAs in place. You've got clear ownership of escalations and exceptions. And you've got a defined outcome for cost, speed, and quality. So this makes all the difference between it's running and it's being managed. And when you run it like a business, you expect performance, you expect to measure cost to serve, you expect to track output, to continuously improve, and hold your internal and external team to standards, not just effort. So Gyner, how do you recognize when a shared services team has truly entered a steady state, not just operationally, but really commercially?
So I'll have a little fun with this answer. The fun answer is when they start complaining, not when they start complaining, when the business starts to complain that the shared services team is now starting to ask for process improvements. To me, that's something, right?
Well, what does that mean? So what does that, what does signifies?
So the way I think about it is, so now you've dropped in a shared services team, a new team effectively, that has not been part of your business, doesn't have the bad habits, doesn't treat bad process as process. They have a clean slate. Right? You've defined the process, they're following the process you defined, and all of a sudden you start to find out that your process has all these tangential flows, right? I think if you're a Marvel fan and you watched the Loki series, they said that, what do they call that? Every time there was a break in the timeline, a new timeline was created. That, the analogy of that is your process. The optimal process is the one that they designed and told you it is. What really starts to happen is you find out, well, except for this case, except for this case. And then those failure points, they try to attribute or hold the shared service team accountable for those failure points, even though those processes were never defined to begin with, right? So, in short, it's a long way of answering your question, but it's like, now I know I'm at steady state with the shared service team because all those things are starting to show up. And those become opportunities for continuous improvement. And that's the way to start to think about it.
That's very interesting. Because, in your mind, it's a one process. It's a happy path, right? But because you've developed a level of maybe expertise or knowledge in the process, and you see it one chunk. But when someone else is coming in new and they are managing now the process, they're seeing all the exceptions, all the variation. You might think it's one happy path, but the reality is only 30% of transactions go through a happy path, and then you have 70% of the time there are variation, whether it's in step 1 or step 5, and that gets us into now the actual management side, Gyner, because if shared services is now a business unit, you need a business cadence to go with it. And this is where a lot of companies go passive. They think it's running, so I'll just check in if something breaks. But if you're serious about performance, and you really need a governance rhythm, just like you would with any business function or external partner. And here's what it may look like. You want to have a weekly service review, and that is typically run by the business process owner and the shared services lead. On the call, you're covering SLAs, backlogs, escalations, staffings, and any updates. Then you want to have a monthly ops review where you're looking at trends across the team. So the weekly service review is by service line. Like you would have a separate one for billing, for collections, customer service, whatever it is, AP, right? And you have those, on a weekly basis. But then on a monthly basis, you're looking at trends across the team. And this is where you might have someone like at the VP level or director level involved in these conversations. The weekly service review are typically at the business process owner, which is typically a manager or a supervisor. The monthly ops review is really a director or a VP level, where you're looking at trends, you're digging into the rework, the throughput, the quality, the cost metrics. And then on a quarterly basis, this is where really the C-suite ideally is involved, where you're discussing the service health, you're discussing the ROI, the expansion opportunities, and continuous improvement priorities like the ones you mentioned, Gyner. And this is not about micromanagement. It's about business management. You're holding your shared services partner entity to performance just like you would to a vendor or a P&L owner or a department head. So, and if you're using a BPO to run your shared services, you want to make sure that these cadences are baked into your SOW. So, Gyner, what's your approach to managing shared services once it's live? Like, especially when you're trying to maintain that, peer-to-peer accountability.
Yeah, I think you hit it right. I think I'd say the day-to-day KPIs are the ones you want to review weekly. And then monthly, you want to take those KPIs and really look at trends, right? So the weekly is more about managing the tactical flow of the work itself. And the monthly is about understanding if the trends are telling us we're improving or not improving and why, right? Because those are two different action sets, right? This one is you're adjusting every day. Hey, maybe we need to change our hours and how we answer our phones or how we approach calling customers. The other one is, hey, we're really, all that work and we're still seeing this kind of flat line on the KPIs. Maybe we should revisit the process and start to understand it, right? A little differently or better. Or maybe we don't have the right team on it. There's a lot of things that helps you kind of get after the process itself and the team and the organization of the team. Whereas the first one's like, hey, day to day, how can we just improve our throughput? Right?
Exactly. And then on a quarterly basis, it's like you have the steering committee, right? The C-suite getting together to decide what to expand, what to retract, what to keep in the shared service center, what to take back across, and what's the ROI, what's the business case, are we on track with the business case, and whatnot.
Yeah, for me, the quarterlies are, a review of the trends from the monthlies, but then you add a few more things. You start to say to yourself, how can I add a strategic view of maybe where I can add shared service resources in other areas of the business, right? If it's working, right? What are my other areas and how do I start to think about that, right? The other piece of it is, hey, what is this telling me about the scalability of my business in general, right? Because it's going to tell you something. It's going to start to tell you that maybe you're very operationally complex and the scalability is the scalability, right? And either you change your value proposition to the customer up front, or you come to terms with the fact that the operations are going to be what they are, and this is going to be your scale going forward, right? Absolutely. You might optimize your process over time. There's a sense of continuous improvement that will always happen, so set that aside. But the aggregate view will say, do I have an ability to streamline this further? Or is just, at some point you run out of the process improvement kind of approach and you get tighter on that bell curve and there isn't a lot of process improvement left, and you still may say, is that too operationally complex for my business? To me, those are the quarterly reviews.
I love it.
you think
And,
about?
and this is a great segue to the third piece here, which is about driving improvement. Because while shared services execute, but the business owns the process. And in a steady state, yes, shared services owns the execution, but you, the business, the corporate leaders, still own the process, and that means improvement is a shared effort. Uh, Shared services identify issues, they track rework, bottlenecks, and manual steps, and they propose changes. They run the quality assurance and make the case. But it's only the business or the process owner that's really placed at the corporate level. They are the ones to approve the change. They are the ones that it ensures with the upstream and downstream workflows, because they're the closer to the customer. They're closer to the other areas of the business, and they are the ones that need to support the change management and communication. Your shared service leader can't make those decisions, right? And you are the one who have access to the systems and to the data that your shared services team needs so to make those decisions. So it's a joint loop where the shared services runs the machine, but you own the design of the machine, and you're not like a business, meaning shared services operates, the business governs. So, Gyner, what helps you balance that accountability? And you saw that shared services has the pace to improve, but the business doesn't lose process control, and you walk that fine line of who owns what, and how do you improve, and when do you push back? How do you balance that accountability?
I think that gets the KPIs are obviously the very quantitative view of that. There's it's very objective. It tells you a lot, right? The qualitative view of that becomes interpreting the KPIs and asking the right questions to the team in general. And you have to decide. You always start with the leaders of the team. So if there's a point person on the shared service group and there's a manager in the department themselves, you're going to start with those two roles, and you're going to say, what is this telling us? Help me understand the process. Help me understand where we can still improve, right? To me, that's where you start. And if the questions aren't getting answered, because look, they are managers or leaders at some point, and the level of detail you may be asking may be one step beneath. It may require bringing in some of the transactional folks, not all of them, but enough to give you that insight into that, that process.
Yeah, and I love that. And where we see magic happens is when the shared services team, along with the cross-functional business process owners, come together and map the value stream and look at it end to end, like order to cash, procure to pay, hire to retire, right? Because shared services owns few steps in that value stream, but then the corporate still owns the bigger chunk of that value stream. And your upstream processes are impacting downstream, and your downstream processes are impacting the end customer, and there's a feedback. So creating that alignment is key, and some of the tools we deploy is value stream mapping from Lean, which has been magical in a lot of cases to just bring that alignment, not just at the from a shared services corporate perspective only, but even cross-functionally. Very few, interestingly enough, very few folks sit down and actually just map the process end to end to kind of understand the entire how value flows through the business.
As somebody who did Lean Six Sigma in the past, I'll tell you the primary reason of not doing it is a little bit psychological, which is I almost don't want to know how bad it is. If I know how bad it is, it means I have to go do something, right? So you have to get them past the psychological block of that, right? I talk to owners all the time, and one of the things, it's really hard to tell them that over time they've taken a very successful entrepreneurial business, super successful. Kudos to them. But the scale of what made them good when they were small has become a problem as they've gotten larger, right?
Exactly.
Because their organizational structures look like Venn diagrams, and so do their processes, right? Every person does a little bit of the process as opposed to having very clear roles, right? Clear process flows throughout the organization. They don't do that. They still try to scale it the way they did when they had a small business with like 5 people working in it.
And then you throw into the mix the integration, and now we're trying to operate like one company and everything. And that's where shared services, hopefully as it matures, maybe in its second, third year, of operation becomes a transformation engine, an enabler. They don't do everything. They can't do everything, but they become that insight engine that feeds you back insights about what's really working, what's not working at the transactional level, that you can fix at a process and a value stream level, and how do you connect strategy to execution, and it starts driving that improvement. So that's it, folks. If you're asking what does steady state actually look like, this is your answer. If you're looking at it through a business lens, the work is transitioned and is operating. The team is managed with real cadence and accountability, and improvement is ongoing. It's structured, it's owned, and it's governed. And that's how you run shared services like a business, not just an internal help desk. Now, so far, we've been talking about this from the corporate view. You, the business owner, the business process owner, the corporate leader, managing shared services as a second operating entity or body. But in the next episode, we're going to go inside the machine. We're going to talk about what it takes to run a shared services pod day to day. How do you manage agents? How do you coach for performance? What does rigor look like at the team level? And joining us on that episode is our very own Noel Stanley, our Director of Operations here at Origo, who runs our Shared Services Center in the Philippines. And he's going to give you behind the scenes view of how we actually run the floor. So until then, make your days great, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Gyner.
Thanks, team.